May 18th, 1900, Volume 3, Filling One's Interior with God. As I was still without my adorable Jesus, at the most a few shadows, oh, how much bitterness it costs me, how many tears I have to shed. This morning, after much waiting and searching, I found him in my very bed, all afflicted with the crown of thorns piercing his head. I removed it very gently from his head, and I placed it on mine. Oh, how bad I saw myself before his presence! I did not have the strength to utter a single word. Having compassion for me, Jesus told me, "Be cheered, do not fear. Try to fill your interior with me and to fatten it with all virtues to the point of overflowing outside. And when you come to make this overflow, then will I take you to heaven, and all your privations will end." After this assuming an afflicted air, he added, "My daughter, pray, because 3 distinct days have been prepared, each far from the other, with storms, hail, lightnings, and floods, which will cause great damage to men and to plants." Having said this, he disappeared, leaving me a little more relieved in the state in which I find myself, but with a thought. Who knows when I get to make this overflow? And if I never do it, will I perhaps have to be always far away from him? May 18th, 1905, Volume 6, Love Deserves Preference Above Everything. Continuing in my usual state, blessed Jesus came for just a little and told me, "My daughter, fear takes life away from love. Not only this, but also the very virtues, which do not originate from love, decrease the life of love in the soul. On the contrary, in all things, love deserves preference, because love makes everything easy, while the very virtues which do not originate from love are like many victims that end up in a slaughter. That is, the destruction of the virtues themselves." May 18th, 1906, Volume 7, The Soul Suffers While Jesus Sleeps. I was feeling very much in suffering, soul and body, to the point that I myself don't know how I live, when I saw blessed Jesus for just a little, resting and sleeping in my interior. I called him, I pulled him, but he would not listen to me. Then, after much hardship, he told me, "My beloved, do not want to disturb my rest. Do you not tell me that you want to suffer in my place, and that you want to suffer in your humanity everything which I would suffer in my humanity if it were living, intending to relieve my suffering members through your sufferings, by suffering yourself so as to leave me free? So, while you suffer, I rest." And while he was saying this, he fell asleep more soundly, and he disappeared. What he said to me are my continuous intentions in my sufferings. May 18th, 1914, Volume 11, Peaceful Souls Are the Staffs of God. As I was feeling oppressed, I was almost about to be surprised by the poisonous waves of disturbance. My lovable Jesus, my faithful sentry, immediately ran to prevent disturbance from entering into me, and scolding me, told me, "Daughter, what are you doing? The love and the interest I have to maintain the soul at peace are such and so great that I am forced to make miracles in order to keep the soul at peace. And those who disturb these souls would want to confront me and prevent this miracle of mine, all of love. So I recommend to you, be balanced in everything. My being is in full balance in everything, and yet I do see and feel evils, and bitternesses I do not lack. Nevertheless, I never become unbalanced. My peace is perennial. My thoughts are peaceful. My words are honeyed with peace. The beating of my heart is never tumultuous, even in the midst of immense joys or interminable bitternesses. The very operating of my hands in the act of scourging flows over the earth as enveloped in waves of peace. So if you do not maintain yourself at peace, since I am in your heart, I feel dishonored, and my way and yours are no longer in accord. I would feel hindered in you from carrying out my ways in you, and therefore you would render me unhappy. Only peaceful souls are my staffs on which I lean, and when the many iniquities snatch scourges from my hands, by leaning on these staffs, I always do less than what I should do. Ah, if may it never be, I lacked these staffs. In lacking my supports, I would send everything to ruin. May 18th, 1915, Volume 11. The divine justice imposes chastisements, but neither these nor the enemies get close to the souls who live in the divine volition. Continuing in my poor state, I felt my poor nature succumbing. I am in a state of continuous violence. I want to do violence to my adorable Jesus, but he hides so as not to be violated more. Then, when he sees that I am not in the act of doing violence to him because he is hidden, all of a sudden he makes himself seen and starts crying for all that miserable humanity is suffering and will suffer. Other times, in a touching and almost imploring tone, he tells me, "Daughter, do not use violence on me. My state is already violent in itself because of the grave evils that the creatures suffer and will suffer. But I must give justice its rights." And while he says this, he cries, and I cry together with him. Many times it seems that, transforming himself completely into me, he cries through my eyes. All the tragedies, human bodies mutilated, floods of blood, towns destroyed, churches profaned, which Jesus had shown me many years before, pass before my mind. My poor heart is shredded with pain. Now I feel it writhing with the spasm, now freezing. And while I suffer this, I hear the voice of Jesus saying, "How I grieve, how I grieve." And he bursts into sobs. But who can say everything? Now, as I was in this state, my sweet Jesus, in order to somehow calm my fears and frights, told me, "My daughter, courage. It is true that great will be the tragedy, but know that I will have regard for the souls who live from my will, and for the places where these souls are. Just as the kings of the earth have their own courts and quarters in which they keep safe in the midst of dangers and among the fiercest enemies, since their strength is such that while the enemies destroy other places, they do not dare to look at that point for fear of being defeated. In the same way, I too, King of Heaven, have my quarters and my courts on earth. These are the souls who live in my volition, in whom I live, and the court of heaven crowds round them. The strength of my will keeps them safe, rendering the bullets cold and driving back the fiercest enemies. My daughter, why do the blessed themselves remain safe and fully happy, even when they see that the creatures suffer and that the earth is in flames? Exactly because they live completely in my will. Know that I put the souls who live completely from my will on earth in the same condition as the blessed. Therefore, live in my will and fear nothing. Even more in these times of human carnage, not only do I want you to live in my will, but to live also among your brothers, between me and them. You will hold me tightly, sheltered from the offenses that creatures send me, as I give you the gift of my humanity and of all that I suffered, while you keep me sheltered. You will give to your brothers my blood, my wounds, my thorns, my merits for their salvation. May 18th, 1923, Volume 15. How difficult it is to find a soul who wants to suffer. The executioner of souls present in the church. I was feeling all afflicted and almost without my sweet Jesus. What hard martyrdom is his privation! A martyrdom without the hope of storming heaven like the martyrs do, which renders their every suffering sweet. His privation instead is martyrdom which disunites, burns, cuts, and opens an abyss of separation between the soul and God. A martyrdom which, instead of sweetening suffering, embitters it, intoxicates it, in such a way that while the soul feels herself dying, death itself runs away from her. Oh God, what pain! Now, while I was in the immense abyss of the privation of my Jesus, as he just barely moved in my interior, I said to him, "Ah, my Jesus, you do not love me any more." And he, not paying attention to me, made himself seen all afflicted, as though holding a black thing in his hand, which he was about to throw upon the creatures. Then he took my heart in his hands, squeezed it tightly, pierced it through, and my heart anxiously awaited his pains as refreshment and balm for the pains suffered because of his privation. Oh, how I feared that he might cease to make me suffer, plunging me once again into the abyss of his separation. Then after this he said to me, "My daughter, I do not pay attention to words, but to facts. Do you think it is easy to find a soul who really wants to suffer? Oh, how hard it is! With words there are many who want to suffer, but with facts they run away when one pain oppresses them or other sufferings surround them. Oh, how they would rather free themselves, and I remain always the isolated Jesus in pains. This is why, when I find a soul who does not shun suffering, and who wants to keep me company in my pains, even more she waits and waits for me to bring her the bread of suffering. This gives me the delirium of love, and makes me reach the point of doing follies, and of abounding so much with this soul as to astonish heaven and earth. Do you think it was something indifferent over my heart, which loved so much, that while you were without me, you were waiting for me, for nothing else but to receive from me my bitter pains?" But while he was saying this, he made me feel that the most holy sacrament was passing by in the street, and he gave a stronger squeeze to my heart. And I, "My Jesus, what is going on? Where are you going, and who is carrying you?" And he, all sad, "I am going to a sick person, and I am carried by an executioner of souls." And I, frightened, "Jesus, what are you saying? What? Your ministers? Executioners of souls?" And he, "How many executioners of souls there are in my church! There are executioners attached to interests, who make a slaughter of souls, and who, with their example, instead of rendering souls detached from all that is earth, engulf them even more. There are the immodest ones, who, instead of purifying souls, disfigure them. There are executioners of pastimes, dedicated to pleasures, to strolls and other things, who instead of rendering souls recollected and infusing in them love for prayer and retreat, distract them. These are all slaughters of souls. How much pain does my heart not feel in seeing that the very ones who were to help and sanctify souls are the cause of their ruin. May 18th, 1926, Volume 19. Just as the Virgin had to embrace everything and do the acts of all in order to obtain the longed-for Redeemer and conceive him, in the same way the one who must obtain the supreme Fiat has to embrace all and answer for all. Luisa feels the weight of her responsibility. Jesus reassures her. I was fusing myself in the holy divine will, and after going around all created things in order to impress my I love you, so that my I love you might resound everywhere and over all, to requite my Jesus for his great love, I arrived at that point at which I would be requiting my God for all the love he had in the act of being conceived in the womb of the celestial Mamma. At that moment, my beloved Jesus came out from within my interior and told me, "My daughter, in order to conceive me, eternal Word, my inseparable Mamma was enriched with seas of grace, of light, and of sanctity by the Supreme Majesty. And she did such and so many acts of virtue, of love, of prayer, of desire, and of ardent sighs, as to surpass all the love, virtues, and acts of all generations, which were needed in order to obtain the longed-for Redeemer. So when I saw in the Sovereign Queen the complete love of all creatures, and all the acts needed to deserve that the Word be conceived, I found in her the requital of the love of all, our glory restored, all the acts of the redeemed ones, and even of those for whom my redemption was to serve as condemnation because of their ingratitude. Then did my love make its final display, and I was conceived. Therefore the right to the name of mother is natural for her. It is sacred, because by embracing all the acts of the generations and substituting for all, it was as if she delivered them all to new life from her maternal womb. Now you must know that when we do our works, we have to give so much love, light, and grace to the creature who is chosen, and to whom the work is entrusted, that she may be able to give us all the requital and the glory of the work entrusted to her. Our power and wisdom would not deposit themselves in the bank of the creature from the very beginning of a work of ours, as though in the act of going bankrupt. Our work must be safe in the creature, who is called as primary act, and we must collect all the interest and the glory equivalent to our work entrusted to her. And even if our work were later communicated to the other creatures, and because of their ingratitude it ran the risk of failing, this would be more tolerable for us, because the one to whom it was entrusted at the beginning allowed us to collect all the interest in place of the failures of the other creatures. This is why we gave her everything and received everything from her, so that all the capital of redemption might remain intact, and through her our glory might be completed and our love requited. Who is the wise man who from the very beginning would put his capital in a bank that is about to go bankrupt? First he makes sure, and then he entrusts his capital. However, it may happen that later on it fails, but this cannot cause him grave damage, because he has already made up for his capital through the much interest received. If man does so, much more so does God, whose wisdom is incomprehensible. And this was not about just any work or a small capital, but it was about the great work of redemption, and all the cost of the infinite and incalculable value of the eternal Word. It was a unique work, nor could a new descent of the eternal Word on earth be repeated. Therefore we had to place it in safety in the celestial sovereign lady. And since we entrusted everything to her, even the very life of a god, she, as our trustworthy one, had to answer for all, becoming the guarantor and the one responsible for this divine life entrusted to her, as indeed she did. Now, my daughter, what I did and wanted from my celestial mamma in the great work of redemption, I want to do with you in the great work of the supreme Fiat. The work of the divine Fiat is a work that must embrace everything: creation, redemption, and sanctification. It is the basis of everything. It is the life that flows in everything and encloses everything within itself. Because it has no beginning, it is the beginning of all things, and the end and fulfillment of our works. See, then, the capital we want to entrust to you is exuberant. You have not calculated it. But do you know what it is that we entrust to you in the supreme Fiat? We entrust to you the whole creation, all the capital of redemption, and that of sanctification. My will is universal. In all things it has been the operator, so it is right that what belongs to it be entrusted to you. Would you perhaps want my will without its works? We do not know how to give our life without our works and our goods. When we give everything. And just as by giving the word to the celestial queen, we centralized all his works and his goods in her, in the same way, by giving you our supreme will, reigning and dominating in you, we give you all the works that belong to it. This is why we are giving you so many graces, knowledges, and capacities, so that from the very beginning the supreme Fiat might suffer no failure. And you, placing it in safety, must give it the requital of love and glory of all creation, redemption, and sanctification. Your task is great. It is universal, and must embrace everyone and everything in such a way that if our will, communicated to the other creatures, should suffer some failure, in you we must find the compensation for the void of others. And as you place it in safety within yourself, and you give us the love, the glory, and all the acts that the other creatures should do for us, our glory will always be complete, and our love will collect its just interest. So, you too will be our trustworthy one, the one responsible for the divine will entrusted to you, and its guarantor. Now, while Jesus was saying this, I was taken by such fright. I comprehended all the weight of my responsibility, and fearing strongly that I might put in danger nothing less than all the weight and works of a divine will, I said, "My love, thank you for so much goodness of yours toward me, but I feel that what you want to give me is too much. I feel an infinite weight that crushes me, and my littleness and incapacity have neither strength nor ability. As I fear that I might displease you, and I might be unable to embrace everything, go to some other creature more capable, so that all this capital of your supreme will may be safer, and you may receive all the interest equivalent to such a great capital." I had never thought of such a great responsibility, but now that you are making me understand it, I feel my strength fail me, and I fear my weakness. And Jesus, clasping me to himself to relieve me from the fear that crushed me, added, "My daughter, courage, do not fear. It is your Jesus that wants to give you too much. Am I perhaps not free to give whatever I want? Do you perhaps want to put a limit to my complete work, which I want to entrust to you? What would you say if my celestial mamma had wanted to accept me, the eternal Word, but without his goods and without the acts that were needed to be able to conceive me. Would this be true love and true acceptance? Certainly not. So would you want my will without its works and without the acts that befit it? Now, so that you may remove this fright, you must know that everything I have told you, that is, this capital so great, is already in you. After I had you acquire the practice of giving me the requital of the glory and the love of all creation, redemption, and sanctification, making you embrace everything and every one, and having seen that the equivalent interest was coming to me easily, only then did I want to make known to you, with more clarity, the great capital of my will entrusted to you, so that you may know the great good you possess, and as you come to know it, I may sign the deed of the capital entrusted to you, and also make for you the receipt of the interest you give me. If you did not know it, neither the deed of the capital nor the receipt of the interest could be made. Here is therefore the necessity to make it known to you. Besides, why do you fear to the point of wanting to send me to another creature? Do you not have a love within you that says, I love you for everyone and for everything, and a motion that repays me for the motion of all, and that in everything you do embraces everyone, to give me the acts, the prayers, the glory, and the reparations of all, as though in one single embrace? If you already do this, why do you fear? At that moment I saw other souls around me. Jesus went to them, and checking them all, he seemed to touch them to see whether, at his touch, the motion of his divine life would come out. But nothing came out. Then he came back to me, and taking my hand, he squeezed it tightly. At his touch, a light came out of me, and Jesus, all content, told me, This light is the motion of the divine life in you. I went to the other creatures, as you saw, but I did not find my motion. How then can I entrust the great capital of my will? This is why I have chosen you, and that is enough. Be attentive and do not fear. May 18th, 1927, Volume 21, The Value of the Acts Done in the Divine Will. How one who lives in it possesses the source of goods. How God does not know how to leave things half done. Victory on both sides. I was following the divine will, going around the whole creation, and while I was doing my acts, my sweet Jesus made himself seen in my interior, gathering these acts on his lap, that were all of light, but one more refulgent than the other, one more beautiful than the other. And he called the angels and gave each one of them part of these acts, and they competed among themselves to receive them, and as though in triumph they carried them up to heaven. And Jesus, all goodness, told me, My daughter, the value of the acts done in my will is so great that the angels consider themselves fortunate to receive them. They see in them the creative virtue. They hear the echo of the divine fiat in these acts that, while being light, are divine voices, and while being voices, are melodies, are beauties, beatitude, sanctity, divine science. And since my will is virtue of heaven, the angels aspire to bring the acts done in it into their celestial dwelling. Anything that is done in my supreme will cannot remain on earth. At most, they can be done down below, but my will itself, like magnet, draws them back to itself, into their source, and gives birth to them in the celestial fatherland. Then I felt my poor mind as though absorbed in the eternal fiat, and I thought to myself, how can so much power be possible? So many acts in one, done by operating in the divine will. And my lovable Jesus added, "My daughter, why does the sun give light to all the earth? Because it is greater than the earth, because it possesses the one and complete strength of light. It possesses the source of colors, of fecundity, and of the variety of sweetnesses. And this is why, the sun being greater than the earth, it can give light to all the earth. It can give the variety of colors to flowers, and the different sweetnesses to plants and fruits. In its greatness and magnificence, the sun does one single act. But in its single act, it does so many as to keep the whole earth captured to itself, giving to each thing its own distinct act. Now my will is more than sun, and since it is the endless will, that with one single act issues from itself the fecundity of all the other acts together, the soul who lives in it possesses the source of its acts, its fecundity. And so in the soul in whom my will reigns and dominates, it changes neither regime nor manners, and as she operates in it, her acts come out with the multiplicity and the fecundity of its divine acts. All the acts of God are single acts that embrace everything and do all acts together. See, in the creation of man, one was our act, but in this one act, sanctity, power, wisdom, love, beauty, goodness came out of us altogether. In some there was nothing of our own that came out of us that was not infused in man. We let him share in everything, because when we operate, we do not know how to leave things half done, but we do only complete works. And when we give everything. More so since my will is endless light, and the virtue of light descends into the deepest depth, rises up to the highest, and extends all around. There is not one point that it does not reach, nor can matter or anything extraneous to light enter into it. It is intangible. Its office is to give, and give always, without ever ceasing to give. So it is for the soul who lives in my divine volition. She becomes light together with the light of my will, and therefore as light she descends into the deepest depth of the hearts, and brings the good of her light. She extends everywhere and all around, almost tracing everyone and everything with her light, to bring to each one its effects, the multiplicity, and the variety of goods that her light contains. She would feel as though defrauded if she were unable to extend to all and everywhere, so much so that as she rises up high, penetrates above the azure vault, and echoes my very will reigning in the celestial fatherland, my same will that reigns in the soul dives together with it, the divine will reigning in the celestial fatherland, and extending over all the blessed, forms its reign and drizzles new joys, happiness, and new beatitudes over all. The living in my will is admirable. Its continuous prodigy is the bearer of all goods, is the seed that multiplies to the infinite. Its fecundity is unreachable, and therefore it is longed for by the earth and by all heaven. It is the victory of God over the creature and the victory of the soul over her Creator. How beautiful it is to see the greatest one, the Supreme Being, the Eternal Majesty, sing victory together with the littleness of the creature, and, by virtue of this divine will, engage in a contest, the great and the little, the strong and the weak, the rich and the poor, and both be victorious. This is why I yearn so much that my divine will be known, and that its kingdom come, to let the creature win, and to place her as though at my level. Without my will reigning in the creature, this cannot happen. There would always be distance between me and the creature. She would be the one who loses, nor would she ever be able to praise and sing victory. the work of our hands would not have our likeness. End of May 18th. Fiat.